Thank you all for being here today. It's a great turnout. You signed this in the waiver, you didn't realize it, but you can't come to Gallup without getting some polling data. So I'm here for the next 10 minutes. It's not going to be as bad as your stats class, bear with me. So when we were planning for this event with Meridian, we wanted to say across all of the data that Gallup has, what are sort of some key insights that could be helpful for shaping the conversations over the rest of the day. So I'm going to share really three key findings with you over the course of this talk. First, though, I wanted to anchor, just so everybody knows, where are we getting this data from. The Gallup World Poll is an initiative that Gallup launched in 2005, covers the entire world, 140 plus countries per year, nationally representative samples of the adult populations in all of these countries. And what this means, when we say we're doing a nationally representative sample, it means that in many of these countries, about 100 out of the 140, we're actually going out and doing the kinds of interviews you see on the right-hand side here, door-to-door interviews, sitting in people's houses. I have an example here. This is a map of Nigeria. These are sampling units, so just from one wave of data, locations that we select across the country. We do this same process across the world. I did because we've got a particularly savvy foreign policy audience in here today. I wanted to point out one thing with Nigeria, though. Those who know the country well will notice the far northeastern states are not included in the sampling plan. So there are exclusions in conflict zones, Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic. These are places we can't get to every part of the country. I keep that in mind when I'm looking at the data because I know that we're actually missing some of those who are really facing the greatest hardships around the world. So if anything, maybe there's a slight positivity bias in some of this data as you're looking at some of these patterns. The first thing I wanted to get into today, though, big topic number one, the economy, economic divergence. When we look across some of the biggest economies that Gallup has been tracking, so comparing the G7, which is the blue line here with the BRICS, and we're looking at this one question, which is, do you think economic conditions in the city or area where you live are getting better or getting worse? The simple binary question. Very importantly, we're anchoring this to the local area. We're not asking about people's perspectives on the national economy. We're trying to get out what they're actually feeling in their day-to-day lives. It doesn't take much interpretation on this chart. The BRICS Plus, that broader group of developing nations, has significantly higher economic optimism at a local level than do their counterparts in the G7. Now, this is a sentiment data, of course, but it also reflects realities that we know are taking place. So while the BRICS Plus account for about 45% of the world's population, 46-ish% of the GDP and purchasing power parity, they account for 60% of global development, global economic growth over this time frame. So this is reflecting realities that people in these developing economies really are experiencing this change in their lives. Their reference points to the way they grew up. They see that things are getting better. We see a different story among the most developed economies, and this is reflected in what we see in economic behavior, what we see in political behavior, what we see in lifestyle decisions. We look at things like birth rates over the long term. Do people feel confidence that their economy is moving in the right kind of direction in order to provide the kind of future that they need? That gap is real, and it's out there. Second, I wanted to touch on a topic that everyone in the room can agree on. So we picked migration. This is, I think, one of the more interesting data points that Gallup has been tracking, because what we do is we ask people whether or not they would like to move to another country if given the chance. We also ask them whether or not they've moved to this country. And so we're not looking at that data today, but we do have sort of a really interesting historical data set on flows, looking at actual changes in people's living status. What I'm showing here, if you allow me to explain briefly, so we're looking at something Gallup calls our potential net migration index. That's a lot of words there, but it's actually pretty simple. What this is scoring is the ratio between the number of people who want to come to a country versus the number of people who want to leave a country. So the higher the number, the more tilted it is in favor of people wanting to come to that country. The darker green countries, these are the destination countries out here. For example, in the US, there are 41 people around the world who want to come to the US for every person who wants to leave the United States. It's a pretty significant ratio. It is not the biggest ratio by any means. Now, a couple of points that really stand out in this data. First of all, we're talking about the BRICS and the G7 on the prior slide. Of those BRICS plus countries, there's only one that is a net destination, and that's the UAE. Every other BRICS country, people are more likely to want to leave those countries than they are to want to come to those countries. That's another side of that story about economic optimism. The second data point here, of course, insight is there is simply no way for countries to absorb this many migrants. Like, that is a fact. We know that the migration system as it stands, we just heard the Director General of the International Organization on Migration last week saying that the migration system as it stands today is not working. I think that's something we probably can agree on, whatever the outcomes may be. There's no way that Canada can take on 238% of its population in incoming migrants. The highest on here is actually Iceland. It'd be 5x the Icelandic population. I'm guessing a lot of these people haven't visited Iceland. It's a beautiful place, but they might not want to stay there forever. That's one way of looking at the data, though. A second way is thinking about who are these migrants. And so this is looking at that same kind of construct, but in this case, what we're doing is we're looking at just those who have a college degree. So this is a measure of potential brain gain. Now, a couple of things stand out here. First of all, we've blanked out every place that isn't brain gain. So they're either missing data or they're net exporters here. That's important. The US, of course, still an importer, 7 to 1 among educated potential migrants in terms of where they would like to move. The ratio, it's a little bit lower than it is, but in absolute terms, that's a lot of people. We're talking about hundreds of millions of people with college degrees who want to migrate to these countries. Again, they're mostly desiring to go to G7 countries, not to BRICS type countries. In fact, when you look at the overall population, if we look at countries ranked by population, there are 7 countries in the top 50 in terms of population who are net importers on brain gain. The only one outside of Europe and North America is Saudi Arabia. The rest of those biggest countries are all sending their best and brightest abroad, more likely than they are bringing those people in. The last piece I wanted to touch on here, and this is, I think, a really important setup for hopefully some of the conversations that are going to happen today. We're really looking at, okay, we're looking at sort of outcomes in these first two. How do people feel about the economy? Where do people want to move? Are they desiring to leave? This last one is really about, do people have trust in the institutions that are intended to serve them? And we find this pretty striking relationship here. This is going to be one of those maybe intuitive findings, but there's a lot of power behind it if you really start to think about it. So what we're seeing here in the scatter plot is we're looking at the relationship between, on the y-axis going up, our local institutions index. So these are those local confidence variables you see on the top, whether or not people are satisfied with things like housing, with things like roads, with the water quality and air quality in the area where they live. And then on the x-axis, going from left to right, we have the number of national institutions that they report that they have confidence in. And so what this is telling us is that as people have greater satisfaction with the basic conditions, with the services that government is supposed to provide to them, they're more likely to approve of their national institutions. It may seem pretty intuitive, but this is a really striking relationship, especially considering that chart there is literally all the data we've got. That is data aggregated from 2006 to 2024. So each of those dots is close to 20,000 interviews in a given country, looking at the average across these relationships. This holds really strongly over time. And I think it's a real call for national governments, for institutions that are providing services to really, if they want to rebuild confidence, which we know is slipping, we see this in our US data as well. Gallup just put out recently US numbers, and every headline is just new record low for US institutional confidence in institution X. It's been a trend we've been seeing since the 70s. The numbers, they jump around a little bit, but really they're trending down. This is a crisis we see in the US. It's also a crisis we see in particular in developing countries. If we look at the OECD, last year I was on this stage talking about NATO. If you look at this confidence in local institutions, local service provision, it also predicts whether or not people are likely to approve of leadership of NATO. So institutions at home reflect people's views of institutions abroad. It reflects whether or not they think their governments are delivering for them, whether or not they're keeping up their side of the social contract. And it's something that this kind of data, something that we should really be looking at a lot more carefully. And that's it.